All right, everybody, I'm going to provide this example here as a jumping off point for translating some of the 2D animation fundamentals to 3D. Again, the concepts are, are what we're after here, and we're just sort of manifesting them in a different way. So I'll have an example one here with the waving with the robot. Let's look at a few things about getting this going. In 25, I'm going to make a new file here. Just Control N. When you open 25 up for the first time, it looks different. There we go. So right now, but you can still get to the old layouts. Everything is up here in the corner, and this switches between this, which is the old layouts, right? So this is kind of how Cinema 4D looked in 24. Here, and if I come over, switch, and go to this one, keeps going to the other window. This is how it looks in 25. Again, you can get to anything with your Shift-C command, and then searching that way. However, if you want to keep everything familiar, switch back to the other one, go to Standard, and the icons will still be different, but the layout will be generally the same. And it's also, for right now, as far as I can tell, the animate mode doesn't seem to be populated to the other version. So I'm staying here in the older version so I can get to the animate mode where it's much easier to take care of some of the keyframing. Go ahead, and the robot is in the file browser. Let's look at a few things. And you can search here for the vacuum bot. And bring it into your scene. The controllers on this rig, I think, are pretty clear. You have your main hip controller, and then by default, the arms and the legs are in IK mode. So if I grab the controller and move the end, the elbow accommodates that. In order to get to the more specific hand controls, you can select this diamond controller at the end of the hand. And here we have individual controls for each part of the finger, and then one control for the finger as a whole. So that makes it easy to use the hand. There's also, at the very top, a controller to go back and forth between forward kinematics and inverse kinematics. Right? So by default, we're in IK, where if we grab it and move it, the elbow moves so that it accommodates that. But if we come back and switch to FK, now I get 3 different controllers, each one that rotates down the arm. Kind of the standard rigging that you would do by default as far as parenting and then rotating things underneath the parent. The two positions remain distinct, so if you go between them, they each remember their own set of data. In the waving example, if you look at it, I start off in IK mode, and then when it comes to the part where the hand's waving back and forth, I do switch to FK. And so there's a point there in that switching that I had to switch and then reposition. And I didn't tween between these in 1 or 2 frames. It might have been 4 or 5 frames, so that switching between the controls was actually a slight adjustment in position. But then it made it much easier to do the hand waving as part of the wrist moving back and forth and this sort of sagittal movement that's aligned with the body in FK mode. There's similar controls for the legs. If you select down here, this is the leg controller. So rather than clicking on the foot, selecting back here allows you to easily control and rotate the foot. And for this waving, we don't need much of this right now, but the individual foot controls are all here when you select this controller. Note that all of these things can also be keyframed, and their keyframing controls are right here next to each parameter. When doing this pose-to-pose animation, I think it is much easier to go into animate mode, and rather than drilling down on all of the parameters, I was using the automatic keyframing button, which is the A here. And so this is a toggle switch, and once this is turned on, every change made gets keyframed. So it's kind of like turning on a global stopwatch if this were After Effects. So for instance, now I could do something to the torso, and that automatically gets keyframed, and then move forward to my second pose, and that automatically gets keyframed. Move forward to my third pose. There we go. If I didn't like it, I could make an adjustment. However, when you're working in this mode, it's important to realize that every adjustment does get keyframed unless you turn this off for a period of time. So if I wanted to change the third pose, I'd have to be pretty, I would need to make sure that the playhead is exactly over this pose here, and so that I would overwrite that keyframe. If you're not paying attention, what happens is you get to about the third pose and adjust it, but here you're actually not adjusting it, you're creating a keyframe right before the other keyframe, and we can delete that one. And so just being clear about where the playhead is. The controls for the timeline, if you hold down 1 and click and drag, you're moving left and right. If you hold down 2 and click and drag, you can zoom in and out. And then retiming things in Cinema 4D is much easier. You can just select all of the keyframes. If you need to expand the timing, you can do that. If you need to move the whole thing, you can easily slide it left and right. I think it's a much better interface. And switching in the timeline view between This is the dope sheet view. Over here we have the keyframe view. You can go back and forth. If you do come into this view, remember that you can select specific parameters here, and the H key will resize the range of the window so that it matches the minimum and maximum viewable area. So that makes it easy to see what's going on with individual parameters, and you can actually do that with multiple parameters at the same time. If you shift click 3 of them, hit H, it resizes it so I can see what's going on with these parameters, even though this range may be fairly small given the overall range of all the other animations. So I'll bring this one into the fold here, rotation H, press H, and now you can see that this is too small, but I can see everything in context. Once you start working here, two things I would keep in mind is once you start figuring out what to keyframe, and I would start with setting each pose with at least a body position and rotation keyframe, and then each hand has a position and rotation keyframe. At least that. Where students usually get into trouble is that they keyframe only certain parts for a pose versus leaving other components of the body unkeyframed for certain poses, which causes them to interpolate over the span of 2 or 3 poses, which is can cause just movement that you don't want to have happening. You'll have more explicit control over the movement if you add a keyframe at each pose for the elements that are moving, right? It doesn't have to be every controller, but the main ones that you're going to be using. And I think that's about it for now. So we're going to just create preview animations of the waving and the forward punch, and then we'll clean those up next week. So that's the first job here in 3D, right? Using all of the information from LinkedIn Learning as a guide, and then translating it here using this rig. I think this rig's pretty clear. In IK mode, one other thing is the controller back here is the sort of elbow pointer, which you'll need to help the elbow lead the waving motion. And so this one needs to rotate up and down, or move up and down, in order to control the rotation of the elbow. It changes, especially if the elbow is bent here. I'll do that. And then move this one up and down. So let me know if you have any other questions. I think this is a good starting point here for using this rig.